Greetings folks and welcome to the Electromaker Show. Today's episode is a little bit different. We are still going to go over some new products and some things on funding websites and of course some cool projects, but the main bulk of the show today will be focusing on this. Now this is the CrowPi 2. I did mention it on the show a few times and Elecrow were nice enough to send me one. And it looks on the surface like a laptop, and as the name suggests, CrowPi, it is indeed a Raspberry Pi powered laptop. But it is also a lot more than that. So let's get on with the show. And so, as I said, we're going to start this week's show by having a little talk about the CrowPi 2. The Kickstarter is still ongoing, but as you can see, it is very near to end. In fact, I'm filming this a couple of days before you'll be seeing it, and by the time that this goes live, you'll only have 2 more days to support this project on Kickstarter if you want to. And I'm not going to do a full review here on the show. I've written a review for Electromaker, which will be going live, and there'll be a link to that in the description. But I just wanted to briefly cover a few things about it that I thought were really good, and maybe a couple of things about it which aren't necessarily problems, but they're worth knowing before you get it. Hi, this is Future Ian here. There are a few times in this CrowPi section where I talk about referring back to something later, which will never come. That's because I actually ran out of space on the camera's recording card. It's probably a good thing because, as you're about to find out, this section is about as long as a regular review anyway. So, as I said at the start of the show, this is the CrowPi 2, and it does look a lot like just a laptop, essentially, you know? But it's not. It is way, way more than that. Underneath here, there is a whole array of different sensors. Again, I'm not going to list all of them here, but needless to say, almost every sensor or thing that you would find in any Raspberry Pi or Arduino starter kit is represented here in an integrated circuit board. Now, I think this is a really, really sweet idea. I have said in the past a few times on this show that I kind of don't necessarily like it when everything is already done for you. You're not going to learn electronics that way, but this is sort of the exception that proves the rule, which is a statement that I've never understood. Anyway, to my mind, this is quite nice just because this is already integrated into the Raspberry Pi's GPIO pins, and if you want to do it the old-fashioned way, like you would just putting things into the GPIO pins, there's a little switch here, and when you switch it, these Raspberry Pi headers just become normal headers for the Pi. And there even is a tiny little breadboard here that you can use for doing your own electronic projects. So this is definitely the best of both worlds. Now, the case itself is quite plasticky, and that's kind of to be expected. I mean, this thing is not particularly expensive. Bear in mind that the base version of this, without a Raspberry Pi included, is $143. Which is kind of amazing when you consider that that's a full IPS 1920 by 1080 screen, and yeah, you've got all of these things integrated into a circuit board already. It's cheap. Surprisingly, actually, given that this is also a plastic covered in sort of metal effect Bluetooth keyboard with a little touchpad on it, I wrote the entire review for the CrowPi using this little keyboard, and it was actually okay. As I sort of semi-joked about in the review, I have used laptops by companies that charge a huge amount for their product, which had worse keyboards than this cheap Bluetoothy kind of keyboard thing that comes with the CrowPi 2. The Raspberry Pi that came with this one was a Raspberry Pi 4 4GB edition, and it is nestled into the back of the CrowPi just here, attached by 3 screws. And it's quite nice the way that they've done this. They've obviously had to make a few compromises with designs because there is in the top of the case here a microphone and a camera. But the way that you can use those, if you want to use them, is there's actually a little USB cable, docked into the case here. And when you pull it, it comes free. There's a little channel there for you to pull it out of the case, and then you can plug it into the Raspberry Pi. Now, I don't know whether they had made all the designs and realized too late that they hadn't actually incorporated the camera into the Pi, or whether there was no other way of them doing it. But again, that's actually kind of cool, because if you're not going to use the onboard camera or mic, or if you're just worried about having it plugged in, as many people are these days, you can just literally unplug it, stick it back in the case like this, and leave it. So yeah, whether it's a quirk of design or on purpose, it's actually kind of cool. And I kind of almost wish there were more things which, you know, my desktop webcam, I have to plug that into the USB port whenever I want to use it. On almost every laptop I own, I have no choice as to whether it is plugged in or not. So that's unintentionally a quite nice little security thing they've got going on there. The case also features a little drawer at the back here, which is probably what you've been hearing rattling around the whole time. This thing doesn't rattle. The things I've left in the drawer do. Now the CrowPi kit that I got delivered had a whole load of little electronic components as well. Now these are just the things you'll find in any starter kit. There's resistors, diodes, a little infrared sensor, some capacitors, some buttons, the usual affair. And this nice little tray at the back here, which I think at one point was floated as a place you could put an external battery, which you absolutely cannot. I put a 10K potentiometer in here and it was too thick to even fit with the drawer closed, but it's still quite a nice little touch. Again, they've given you a little breadboard at the front for doing that kind of prototyping work. And if you were learning, or especially teaching a child, the very fundamentals of electronics, it's nice just to be able to have just a laptop kind of form factor with things in it to take with you. So just before moving on to talking about the software side of things, I just want to talk about this just for a little bit longer because it's kind of unique. I can't really think of any other thing out there which has like a board of sensors like this. And there's a lot of stuff in there as well. There's an RFID section which you can use for, well, RFID Minecraft block placing, which is something I'll come back to in a minute. Yeah, as well as having all of the different components that you can learn to use, there's a stepper driver and a stepper motor driver, sorry, and a servo driver on it. I'm tripping over so many words today. It's so hot in Berlin at the minute, I'm sorry. There is a stepper driver motor. Nope. There is a stepper motor driver and a servo driver, which plugs in just up here. And Elecrow are also moving into their own kind of connected devices in the same way that the Grove connectors from Seed Studio work, and they also fit into the same servo connector, which is quite a handy thing. There's a humidity sensor, which I'll show you in a moment. But yes, there's a whole bunch of sensors on here. Not only that, but there's a few things that sort of just give you a hint as to how it's all going to work. So the screen driver up here is obviously a little bit of a circuit board that they could have hidden away in the case somewhere, but it's on the surface here. Everything that is required to make this work, apart from the Raspberry Pi itself, is here and labeled. That also goes for all the different sensors, by the way. They all have a label next to it which says which GPIO pin it's internally connected to. And as I said before, if you just want to eschew that and use completely separate external sensors of your own, you have the option to flick that on as well. The fan here is obviously for the Raspberry Pi. I did wonder whether there would be a problem with it being under this keyboard all the time when you're using it as a laptop. But as I said, I spent hours typing on this thing and doing lots of stuff on this thing. I basically used this as my machine for a day when I was reviewing it. And yeah, no problem, no slowdown. The Pi 4 is a beast. It can take anything. And just before moving on, I thought it might be quite nice to put these two side by side. As I mentioned a long time ago, I reviewed the original CrowPi, and there are some differences to the original. I mean, obviously it was before the Raspberry Pi 4 was around. This was with the Raspberry Pi 3, which, as you can see, was mounted onto the top of the case. And there was no internal keyboard. There was no real attempt to make this a laptop. But a lot of the same features were there. As you can see, there's a sensor board which wasn't as implemented quite as nicely as this one on the CrowPi 2, but it was still at the time something I'd never seen before. And I'm sure there probably are a few features on this one that aren't featured on the CrowPi 2, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. I will say one thing now, that just from my particular use case, bearing in mind that these laptops are meant to be laptop and box top. Bearing in mind that these are meant to be for education, specifically educating children, they aren't necessarily aimed at me. But for my personal use case, one of the things I really did like about the original CrowPi is this is a pretty solid box. I feel quite comfortable having this in hold luggage in an aeroplane, for example. This is solid. If I wanted to send this to someone, I'd just wrap it in brown paper and put it straight in the post and probably not worry all that much about it at all. Now, this one is not. As I said, this is quite plasticky, but it's not meant to be rugged. The last one, I think, was rugged as an afterthought because they needed something to put in that box. And of course, that kind of clamshell would work. This is completely different. This has, for example, a full-sized screen, whereas the other one had, as you probably saw, a much smaller screen. I feel like while they were both aimed for learning, this one has done a much better job for having that laptop sort of experience that is actually an all-in-one learning center. And that's what we'll go on to now, which is the software side of things. So here we are back on the Kickstarter page. The Kickstarter page, I think, does a pretty good job of kind of describing exactly what they're trying to do. Elecrow are definitely very passionate about this idea, about putting this all-in-one hardware machine together as a learning platform, specifically for children. The Kickstarter video is pretty funny as well, by the way. It's worth checking out. So alongside the hardware element of CrowPi 2, they have got some custom software. It's a vanilla Raspbian OS image, but they've added some things on top of it. So I guess you could say it's Elecrow's version of Raspbian OS, but the usability of it is exactly the same as normal Raspbian OS. The only difference is it boots up into their own splash screen, and that is this here. So as you can see, there's different sections for the projects, and the when you click Minecraft, it doesn't just take you to play Minecraft, it takes you to the Minecraft tutorials, which are very cool. And there's a section on AI. If you click Python, it just opens an IDE for Python. But under Learning, there is the opportunity to take lessons in both Python and Scratch. Now this custom thing that comes up, it always comes up when the computer turns on, which is great if you're working with someone younger or someone who isn't particularly computer literate. They can just turn it on and get going. And when you click Learning, you are prompted to make your own user account, which is also kind of cool. This means this could be shared between kids in a family, for example. But this short video is pretty accurate, actually. If it doesn't really matter what you're doing, you can just click the button in the Raspberry Pi toolbar at any time, and it will open up the Learning section. And as you can see, you can just take the keyboard out and start playing with sensors if you want. There are so many examples on the CrowPi 2, many of which are very, very well explained. Both the Python and Scratch lessons work by having the IDE on one side and then a sort of virtual assistant on the other side, which just takes you step by step through what everything does, what the code means. And again, something I quite like, it doesn't put the code in for you, it shows you what the code should be and expects you to enter it. Now, of course, you could just copy and paste it, but as anyone who's learned programming knows, one of the best ways to learn is to actually get the code under your fingers yourself, and this seems to be following that idea. So yes, as you can see here, there are 32 Python lessons, and they are all fantastic. The only criticism I could have is that at some point the difficulty does ramp up very steeply, and it goes from language that's maybe aimed at children to being a little bit more kind of the Python manual language for people who maybe already know what they're doing with code. But that said, I am not someone who is learning Python from scratch, and I'm not someone who's sort of got that young beginner's mind way of going into it. So maybe this is fine. Maybe they know way better than I do what kind of level of ramp up a course should have for a child. Either way, I have to reiterate that there is nothing else out there that is remotely doing anything like this. It is just fantastic. So yeah, I can't waffle on for this entire episode about CrowPi 2. Needless to say, I am very impressed with it. And the one thing that I did find kind of surprising is that as well as it being clearly a very well put together thing for education, for children, and by the way, this is 100% the best Christmas present you could buy someone this year. I can't think of a cooler Raspberry Pi-esque thing. Yeah, I have to be honest, when I first saw the CrowPi and saw the direction that they'd taken it in, I was not really thinking it was going to be all that good. And when they had sent me one through, I am someone who has received things in the past for free and reviewed them, and those reviews haven't always gone particularly well. There is one phone company that will remain nameless who will not let me review their phones anymore after a particularly bad review I gave one of their handsets. But yes, this has blown my expectations away to the extent that I have wanted for a while to have a Raspberry Pi based sort of laptop. Laptop, what kind of pronunciation? Even if I don't personally use the CrowPi 2 for even a sliver of the things that it can actually offer, I would still be pretty comfortable with this as a Pi laptop. But yes, it is not without its quirks. Some of the code stuff might be a little bit hard to follow, but Elecrow had set out to make a much more improved version of the original CrowPi, and they have certainly managed it. Anyway, as I said at the start of this section, I didn't want this to be a full review, but I did want to talk about it in the show just because it made quite a big impression on me. My official review is going to be on the Electromaker website in written form, and I'll make sure there is a link to that in the description of this video. And if you do want to back CrowPi, you still have a couple of days to do so at the time this video goes up. I know you're seeing 4 days to go on the screen right now, but it's actually only 2 or maybe 1 when you see this. So if you are interested, jump right on it. However, I would imagine with how well this Kickstarter has done that they will also be selling these directly from Elecrow. I just wanted to add one final little touch. I didn't cover the fact that there's a lot of extra peripherals that come with the CrowPi. In the box you can see behind me, one of the things that they also give is 2 SNES-like game controllers. In fact, I have a SNES-like game controller hanging on my wall. It's been there since the show began. And this one came from the original CrowPi case. I didn't realize that until a little bit later, but the ones that I bought myself are white. This is also an Elecrow game controller. Anyway, these game controllers came and I was a bit surprised because there's Pygame games on the CrowPi laptop. That's part of the operating system. But they don't work with game controllers. Very few Pygame games do work with game controllers. So I wasn't sure why, but there was another micro SD card supplied with the CrowPi, which I plugged in, and it booted up RetroPie, which I thought was such a nice touch that they just think, yep, okay, well, we've already given you all this educational stuff. At the end of a very long learning day, here's 2 game controllers and an SD card with RetroPie on it. Have fun. Yeah, nice touch. Oh my god, the heat. Whoo! One of the reasons it's so unbelievably hot is, as I've mentioned, I film in an attic, but also while I'm filming, I can't use the fan. So I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be right back with you. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. And now it is, of course, time for the
Mystery Box Competition!
That was weird. So in case you're not familiar, this is the mystery box, and we give something away from the mystery box to one of our viewers every week. Now, I've managed to kind of not fully spoiler myself as to what's in this box. I've kept this thing all over the top pretty much the entire time, and I've only reached into it during the show, during the filming of the show. So yeah, the same as every other week. I'm going to rummage and hopefully not sweat over everything, because it is very, very hot in the Attic of Dreams today. But we have a box from Silicon Labs. They make some nice things to Silicon Labs, but I don't know what development tools means. Oh, we have static-proof bags. We have lots and lots of tiny little... give me a moment and I will get this presentable. Okay, I looked it up. There was a few things in that box, so rather than go through all of it, I'll just quickly show you this, which is the Gecko EFM32 STK board. Now, it's not a board that I am particularly familiar with. In fact, I'm not all that familiar with Silicon Labs stuff, I'm going to admit. But I looked it up, and this thing looks pretty incredible. So the kit comes with this board as well as a magnet sensor which can tell precisely what degree it has been turned round to, as you're seeing on the screen right now, along with a few tiny little postage stamp sized daughter boards which are designed to do various other things. It looks very, very cool indeed, and having had a quick look at the Silicon Labs website, there is also some support there for getting to know how to program it yourself as well. So this looks pretty cool. It's a fairly cool standalone thing anyway. All of the demos should work straight out of the box, and of course it's a very good way to get into the Silicon Labs way of doing things, because they have their own IDE as far as I know. As I say, I'm not all that familiar with Silicon Labs. But anyway, we now have this prize. Let's find a winner for it. And the winner of the mystery box competition this week is Darren Palmer. Congratulations! We'll be in touch with you as to how we can get this out to you. And anyone that would like to take part in the mystery box competition, all you need to do is leave a comment on this video, and we choose each winner at random from all the list of the comments on each video the following week, if that makes any sense. I don't know if I'm making any sense. It is very, very hot. Have I mentioned that already? Anyway, on with the show! So, since we spent quite a bit of time on the CrowPi 2, it's on to a section called Super Quick Projects from the Week. And up first we have a DIY Arduino-based Rodin coil winding machine. Now, if you're not familiar with the Rodin coil, or something called the Starship coil, it's a somewhat controversial thing based on vortex mathematics, which I'm not going to go into. Needless to say, there is a lot of controversy as to whether it is even a thing, but what is definitely a thing is this machine. It is wonderfully put together, it is Arduino-based, and it will wind a Rodin coil, as you are about to see. Now, as I've said, there's a little bit of debate about whether Rodin coils are actually something that people should take seriously. It is very definitely classed as pseudoscience, and I'm not going to get into that whole can of worms here. However, this machine is absolutely fantastic. Using various things that are useful to know about, if you ever want to make your own CNC machine, for example, you're going to want to learn about the things that are involved in making those machines, and this is kind of a good starting point. And if you did actually want something which was similar to this but was definitely confirmed to be useful, the same maker, Mr. Innovative, who I will of course be linking in the channel, YouTube video description for today, has a site called Electric DIY Lab with a very similar machine called a DIY Arduino-based toroid coil winding machine. And this one, of course, if you know anything about electronics, is something that will be definitely useful to you, as can't say the word, toroids are very useful things. So I will leave a link to his blog in the description of this video as well. Now, it is an absolute fact that Careless Whisper by George Michael has some of the best saxophone in it of all time. There's no proof of that, but it is in fact a fact. The only way you could make it better, perhaps, is by having it voice activated and having it blow your hair in a sexy manner.
Okay, Google, I'm feeling sexy today. Okay, I have just the thing.
It's just wonderful, isn't it? Actually, especially on a day like this gives me an idea. Yes! Yes! Oh, this is perfect. So this is a project by user Egg-Shaped Box on the subreddit that we cannot name on this show, which is the substandard robot subreddit. I'm sure we probably could name it on the show, but let's not. I know some people don't like bad language. Anyway, there'll be a link to it in the description, and if you want to do this for yourself, there is in fact a GitHub with instructions as to how to get it going, with the aptly titled Project George Michael. And now quickly onto a project on the Electromaker website. So this is a guide for getting started with Meadow. Now Meadow is a microcontroller, but it runs .NET applications, therefore can be programmed in C#. Now this is something that has quite a special place in my heart because I started coding using C#. I actually got into coding through Unity, which is a game development platform. And even though I've moved on to mostly work in kind of C/C++ for embedded stuff and Python for everything else, it still has a very special place in my heart as the first language I learned, albeit to an extent. I haven't learned any language fully yet. I'm not really a programmer, to be honest. But yes, if you are someone that has a history in C# or you're just interested in the language, because it is quite a nice high-level language for learning if you're new to coding, this is definitely something that is worth a look, and there'll be a link to it in the description of this video. The final project we're looking at today is the latest iteration of the Pi Zero terminal computer. Now this is a project that's been worked on for several years by one of the people who is part of Node. Now, I don't know all that much about Node, I'm actually quite new to them, but they seem to do something really quite nice, which is a hard copy printed zine of all things to do with open hardware and software. It's very beautiful, and as you can see from this video is also very aesthetically beautiful. But the device in question is a very well thought out multifunctional case for the Pi Zero, which is designed to be, as the title suggests, a terminal device with multi-uses. It has a quite large screen that you would usually find on a smartphone, and in fact looks a bit like a smartphone. But these pins on the back you can see are designed for what the creator calls backpacks. And the idea behind that is that you can attach other things to the back of the Pi, be that a fold-out keyboard or some kind of extra wireless device. One of the things they're thinking of using is some kind of, I can't remember if it was LoRa or whether it was actually some kind of GSM signal SIM card device. But the idea is it's modular. You can make your own backpacks for it. There's a lot more going on than just slapping it in a case. The video has got a lot of detail in it, and I won't go into all of it, but it's a lot more than it looks like on the surface, and it is a truly interesting project. More details can be found on the Node website, which I will also link in the description. And just as I mentioned before, the Node zine is something of a thing of beauty, it looks like. I've just ordered volume 2 of the Node zine. The first one is unfortunately already sold out. But if you are someone that likes physical things to do with your hobby, and you also sort of like this kind of like stylized but very information dense thing about the same culture and ideas that we all love, this is definitely something that is worth a look. And now just a couple of quick points. The Google AIY Voice and Vision contest that's happening on the Electromaker website, which I've mentioned several times on this show, is getting very close to the submission date. The submission date is August 14th, which is this Friday. If you are wanting to take part in the competition, or were taking part but kind of maybe didn't realize when the submission date was, it's time to get it together and to get it onto the Electromaker website. And remember, this is a documentation project, so if you have a Google Voice or Vision kit and you still want to take part, if you can come up with something in a couple of days and document it well, there's nothing to stop you entering. And there's a good reason why you might want to. As I mentioned before, there are prizes for this contest. The first prize being €500 in cash plus a Coral Dev board. The second prize being $350 and a Coral Dev board, and the third prize being $150 and a Coral Dev board. Now the cash prize is nice, but the prize of the Coral Dev board is also a very nice thing as well. Now these aren't the most expensive single board computers in the world, but they are beautifully designed, and the option to maybe win one of these and get one free is definitely worth looking into. For those of you that aren't familiar, it's obviously, as you can see, in the Raspberry Pi form factor, but here on top where the heatsink and fan is the system on module. And this is a removable module that is hot swappable, so let's say you had several, you could use them. And this baseboard is essentially just all of the inputs and outputs. The module itself features a TPU, which is Google's Tensor Processing Unit. meaning that you can offload all of the machine learning tasks that you would want to do on this board onto the tensor processing unit, making it significantly faster. And as someone who's messed around with TensorFlow on the Pi before, yeah, it can be pretty slow, even with quite a beefy Pi. But yeah, using one of these completely changes it. Anyway, as I said, August 14th is the cutoff date if you want to enter the contest. I just wanted to make sure everyone that watches the show knew that. One other thing that I wanted to mention on this week's show, but I didn't really know where it would fit in, is a fantastic YouTube series by Mitchell Davis. Now, Mitchell's in a similar situation to me and various people that watch this show, in that they've come from Arduino and wanting to move into other microcontrollers. And while Arduino is fantastic for learning the basics, it does abstract away a lot of the real knowledge you need to work across different microcontrollers and work with the kind of raw tasks like AVRDude or GCC. This series has a very clever way of teaching. So, starting in the Arduino IDE, he takes your normal Blink sketch and then walks through how to set each thing individually using the low-level code that the microcontroller understands. The series starts with just replacing a few things in order to give you a better idea about which pins and things you were using on the microcontroller directly, and the series goes on to teaching you about registers and making a bare bones microcontroller using the same chip out of your Arduino Uno. You don't need to buy a new one, you can just take the chip out and put it on a breadboard. It teaches you also about bootloaders, and as the series goes on, he's getting closer and closer to the idea of moving from Arduino onto an STM chip, which is of course a much more difficult way of working with things for a beginner or someone who's only worked with Arduino. I suggest checking out the series. There'll be a link to the first episode in the description, and I think he's 6 or 7 episodes in now. And yeah, it is very well explained, and it is just the kind of thing that someone who has an Arduino background, who's looking to move into slightly more difficult stuff, needs. He's a fantastic teacher, and I do hope he keeps this series up. That is our show for this week. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you are enjoying the show, consider leaving us a like or maybe subscribing to the channel. And of course, if you leave a comment on this video, no matter what it says, you will be entered into next week's mystery box competition. But for now, I hope you have a great week. Stay healthy, stay creative, and I'll see you then.